Everyone hated her. Not because she was rich, plenty of people in this city had money. Not because she was beautiful, though her presence could turn every head in a crowded room. They hated her because she knew her power, and she wielded it like a weapon. She was the billionaire's daughter, untouchable, untamed, and for years, she treated the world like it was nothing more than her personal stage. Classmates spoke of her cruelty. Waiters whispered about the tips she never left. Employees at her father's empire told stories of her insults that cut deeper than knives. Every room she entered seemed to shrink under the weight of her arrogance. And yet, no one dared confront her. Not the teachers who looked the other way, not the executives who feared her father, not even the so-called friends who secretly prayed she would one day fall. But here's the thing about masks. No matter how perfect, no matter how polished, they always crack. And the cracks in her carefully constructed life were about to split wide open. Because hidden beneath her designer dresses, behind her rehearsed smile, was a truth so dark it could destroy not only her reputation, but the empire her family built. And the one person who would bring it all crashing down, wasn't a rival billionaire. It wasn't a journalist or a politician. It was an intern. The lowest person on the ladder, the one she barely noticed. The moment the secret was exposed, her entire world tilted. Those who once feared her turned. Those who once envied her watched with satisfaction. And those who hated her, finally saw justice unfold before their very eyes. If you're hooked already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the deeper we go into this story, the darker it gets, and you don't want to miss a second of it. But that's not even the worst part. My name is Maya Ortega, and at 21 years old, I thought landing an internship at Carrington Global was the opportunity of a lifetime. Everyone I knew said so. Professors congratulated me. Friends envied me. My parents couldn't stop telling neighbors that their daughter had finally made it into one of the most powerful companies in the country. And for a while, I believed them. The morning I walked into Carrington Tower, I remember stopping in front of the glass doors just to stare. The building was enormous, 47 floors of steel and mirrored windows that caught the sunlight like a blade. It wasn't just a building, it was a monument to wealth, power, and control. The kind of place where people carried themselves differently, where you could feel status hanging in the air like perfume. Inside, the lobby was polished marble from wall to wall, gleaming under soft golden lights that hummed quietly, as if even electricity was told to keep its voice down. A massive sculpture of interlocking rings stood in the center, a modern, expensive, and abstract piece of art. To me, it looked like chains. The reception desk stretched almost the entire width of the lobby. Men and women in tailored suits floated by, their shoes clicking against the stone like a metronome of authority. The air smelled faintly of citrus, the kind of scent pumped through vents on purpose to make the space feel fresh, clinical, and untouchable. Even the security guards looked like they were dressed for a magazine spread. I remember clutching my worn-out backpack tighter, wishing the strap didn't fray at the edges, wishing my blouse didn't wrinkle in the cab. Everyone else seemed to glide through the lobby as if they belonged there. I felt like an intruder, an imposter trying to pass through a world that wasn't built for me. That was the day I first saw her. Sloane Carrington. She didn't just enter the lobby. She commanded it. Heads turned without anyone meaning to, like metal pulled toward a magnet. She was 24, but she carried herself with the authority of someone twice her age. She had that impossible beauty you only saw on magazine covers, glossy hair, flawless skin, tailored dress that whispered money with every step. And yet, what struck me most wasn't her appearance. It was the way the air seemed to shift around her, like even silence bent to accommodate her presence. People made way. Executives straightened their ties. Assistants adjusted the clipboards they didn't need to hold. And she didn't notice. Or maybe she noticed everything and just enjoyed watching people bend themselves smaller in her shadow. I'd heard of her, of course. Everyone had. The billionaire's daughter, heir to a fortune built on real estate, tech acquisitions, luxury brands, and a dozen shell companies no one could fully map. Her official title was Strategic Initiatives Director, which was a fancy way of saying she had authority without accountability. She could sit in on board meetings, reject projects worth millions, and rewrite entire budgets with a single nod, all while barely glancing at the papers in front of her. Her reputation was a living thing in that building. I'd heard the whispers, how she humiliated waiters in restaurants, how she mocked classmates at her Ivy League school, how she turned office staff into cautionary tales if they dared correct her. People called her the weather. Because when she arrived, everything changed. Sometimes she was sunshine, charming and disarmingly warm. More often, she was a storm that no one could predict or prepare for. And there I was, a nobody. An intern assigned to the philanthropy division, tucked between spreadsheets and donor lists, invisible in a sea of sharp suits and endless ambition. My desk was near a printer that never stopped churning. Across from me was a door that only opened for people more important than I could ever dream of being. From where I sat, I could see her office, glass walls on 3 sides, a view of the river spilling out beneath her like it existed only for her to enjoy. Inside, everything was pristine, minimalist furniture, a sculpture worth more than my tuition, and a shelf of books so perfectly aligned they looked like props. Her office wasn't a workspace, it was a stage. And every time she stepped into it, she reminded us that we were the audience. At first, I tried to ignore her. After all, I had my own work to focus on, cleaning donor data, verifying invoices, building reports no one but my supervisor would skim. It wasn't glamorous, but I told myself it was an experience, a stepping stone. That's what internships were supposed to be. A chance to learn, to prove myself. But Carrington Tower wasn't a school. It wasn't even really an office. It was a kingdom. And kingdoms don't care about interns. Still, invisibility has its advantages. When people don't look at you, they don't guard themselves around you. They don't notice you watching. They don't think twice about you overhearing. And slowly, I began to notice things. Little things. Discrepancies. Gaps. The numbers on a budget sheet didn't quite add up. The way charitable donations looked perfect in press releases, but didn't match the actual disbursements in the files I handled. At first, I told myself it was nothing. A typo. A delay. An oversight. But the patterns were too consistent, too deliberate. And if the numbers were shadows, then Sloane was always standing just behind them. She lived above consequences. I lived at their mercy. But something about those gaps gnawed at me, whispering that there was more to her story than arrogance and entitlement. There was something hidden, buried in the empire her family had built, and whether I wanted to or not, I was already walking straight toward it. I wasn't looking for trouble. But trouble doesn't need an invitation. Sometimes, it only needs someone willing to notice. And I noticed. At first, it was small things. A donor file that listed the same family 3 times under slightly different names. An invoice with numbers rounded too perfectly, as if someone had polished them until they gleamed. A press release celebrating a school built in a rural community, but when I checked the foundation's database, the funds were marked as allocated, not delivered. No one else seemed to care. My supervisor barely glanced at my reports, as long as the formatting was neat and the columns balanced. Executives clicked through presentations with glassy eyes, nodding at whatever figure landed on the screen. And Sloane? She smiled at the numbers the way a magician smiles at a deck of cards, because she already knew what was coming, and the rest of us were just waiting for the trick. Every time she walked past my desk, I felt her shadow stretch longer than her heels. She didn't see me. Not really. To her, I was background noise, the hum of the printer, the shuffle of papers, the intern whose name she didn't need to remember. And yet, I couldn't stop watching her. Not because I admired her. But I wanted to understand how someone so young could command so much fear. There was a rhythm to her cruelty. She would enter a meeting and let silence sit for just long enough to make people sweat. She'd ask a question she already knew the answer to, then tear apart the poor soul who stumbled through it. And when she smiled, that was the worst part. Because her smile was never warm. It was a victory. Still, beneath all that performance, I caught glimpses. Moments when her confidence cracked for just a second. When her eyes flickered to the corner of a room, or her hand tightened around a pen as though she needed something solid to hold on to. They were tiny, almost invisible, but they were there. And each time I noticed, I felt the same whisper in the back of my mind, she's hiding something. The tower amplified everything. The higher the floor, the heavier the silence. The more glass around you, the less anyone dared to speak freely. I learned quickly that Carrington Global wasn't run on policies or procedures. It was run on fear, the fear of being noticed in the wrong way, of stepping out of line, of catching Sloane's attention at the wrong time. And fear leaves footprints, even when people try to sweep them away. I told myself to ignore it. To finish my 12 weeks, polish my resume, and leave with a bullet point that would open doors for the rest of my career. But every day, the gaps in the data grew louder. Every time I looked at those files, I felt as though the tower itself was whispering to me, daring me to connect the dots. And then one afternoon, while cross-checking donor entries against vendor payments, I saw something I couldn't explain away. It wasn't just a typo, or a rounding error, or a delay in reporting. It was deliberate. Precise. A signature of deceit hiding in plain sight. That was the moment I realized, I wasn't just noticing anymore. I was stepping into something much bigger. And if I kept pulling at this thread, I might unravel more than I was ready for. But by then, it was already too late. The first cracks appeared where they always do, in the places no one bothers to look. My normal was supposed to be safe, clean the spreadsheets, match donations to projects, send tidy summaries by the end of the day, then vanish into the hum of the printer. But the printer didn't hum anymore. It groaned. People stopped saying good morning. The air felt heavier, like the building was holding its breath and daring us to do the same. I watched the numbers start misbehaving. A youth literacy grant was allocated for 9 months with no delivery date. A vendor called Northbridge Partners LLC billed program advisory fees that looked suspiciously like percentages, not hours. 3 donors with the same street address but different last names. In a healthy system, that's noise. At Carrington, it felt like a language. That's when the cast around me sharpened into focus. Janice, my supervisor, perfected the art of smiling without teeth. She carried 2 phones and 1 priority, not being responsible. If a number looked strange, she called it timing. If a line item wouldn't reconcile, she called it pending. If I asked a second question, she praised my curiosity like it was a disease I might recover from. Cara Denham, senior analyst, wore mistake-proof heels and a lanyard crowded with conference badges. She was the kind of person who elbows politely. Helpful until help meant sharing credit. She called me sweetheart when she needed a file and intern when she needed a scapegoat. I learned quickly that Cara collects favors like other people collect mugs. Theo Lee from IT was a quiet observer. He moved like an apology and noticed like a camera. If a VPN blipped, he already knew why. If an access log looked odd, he didn't say it out loud. He would slide an extra battery pack toward my keyboard when he saw my laptop cable fray. Theo was not my friend. Theo was the one person here who remembered people had names. Priya Raman in finance had the posture of a violinist and the patience of a saint. She never raised her voice, only her eyebrows. When I sent her a reconciliation question, she sent back 2 answers, the official one for the record, and the real one in a separate line that said, "Call me." Priya didn't gossip. she warned. Luis Navarro, on the night shift at the facilities, discovered every drop's secret and pretended not to. He knew which conference rooms were booked late, but showed up dark in the calendar. He knew which bins filled with shredded paper were twice as fast after a board meeting. He knew who cried quietly in the stairwell on Tuesdays. Luis was the building's conscience, disguised as a cart with squeaky wheels. And then there was Brent Vale, Sloane's assistant. His job was to protect her time and manufacture everyone else's urgency. He never blinked when he told you something impossible was due at 5 p.m. He winked when he added, "She'll be reviewing personally." Brent believed in proximity as power. He was very close to the sun. In this world, reputations move faster than emails. Mine shifted overnight, from invisible to detail-oriented to obsessive. The shift happened the day I flagged a discrepancy on the Riverton Reads initiative. Press releases showed ribbon cuttings and smiling faces. Our ledger showed allocation pending. Priya's reply pinged my screen, a neat sentence that said, "We have a temporary hold for documentation," followed by a second line that said, "Check vendor 6802, month end." Vendor 6802 was Northbridge Partners LLC. When I filtered for Northbridge, it was everywhere. Small amounts, never enough to alarm. Always neatly rounded. Always arriving on the same weeks we announced something generous. Advisory. Coordination. Facilitation. Vague words that looked legitimate at a glance. I was no auditor, but my eyes knew a pattern when they saw one. I sent Janice a cautious note. She replied with praise about my thoroughness, and an invitation to defer to leadership on timing. Then she forwarded my email to Sloane. The meeting invite landed 5 minutes later. The glass conference room on 41 had a view that made the river look obedient. 12 chairs. One head of the table. Sloane didn't sit, she arranged herself, like a painting hung at eye level. Executives lined the walls with legal pads they would never write on. Kara claimed a seat with calculated humility. Janice placed me at the far end, where the glass curved and light reflected your uncertainty at you. Sloane began with silence, the way she always did, until you felt compelled to fill it with gratitude for being summoned. Then she smiled. She spoke about optics, about aligned narratives, about guardrails that would prevent well-intentioned overreach. She didn't say my name, but she described me perfectly, an intern who had eagerly surfaced in-progress items lacking full context. People laughed. The kind of laughter that asks permission first. I felt my face go hot in a way I hoped looked like lightning. Then she pivoted. "We must protect our stories," she said, "and our stories must be true." It sounded like a hymn. It was a warning. After the meeting, Brent glided over, voice dipped in honey. He thanked me for my passion for accuracy, and handed me a new assignment: prepare the gala disbursement ledger for the Foundation's annual event. "Sloane wants this perfect," he said, "and she wants you to own it." Ownership here meant responsibility without control. I took the file. Inside were line items that looked like the world at its best: clinics funded, scholarships awarded, housing renovated. It should have felt like purpose. It felt like a performance. By Friday, the building began to breathe differently. Security tightened on floors that were already secure. A new dress code reminder appeared in my inbox, though it only ever landed on junior staff. Kara forwarded an email chain to me with a note: "Can you fix this formatting? You broke the totals." I hadn't touched it yet. At lunch, I ate alone in the atrium, a greenhouse of glass and curated plants. That's where Priya sat across from me, not asking permission. "Your ledger," she said. "Keep the raw data. Save locally. Not the shared drive." "Why?" "Because files on the shared drive have a way of changing their minds," she said. "And no one remembers what they believed before." She left her salad untouched. I watched the door behind her slide open for a group of men in suits who had their names printed on other people's name tags. Back upstairs, normal rearranged itself again. A donor file I'd highlighted on Tuesday now looked pristine. A column labeled pending had transformed into delivered, and the timestamp said the change happened before I ever opened the document. When I tried to pull the version history, I met a permissions wall tall enough to cast a shadow. I asked Theo for help without asking out loud. I brought my laptop to IT for battery issues. He nodded without looking up. Battery issues, he said. He typed, then typed again. You're fine, he said finally. Then quieter, your shared drive access was modified on Wednesday at 11:42 p.m. Not by you. By who? He didn't answer. He handed the laptop back like it was delicate glass. Charge fully overnight, he said, louder. Don't let it die. That afternoon, Brent staged a small public humiliation, a friendly reminder email to the philanthropy team about maintaining chain of command on sensitive reconciliations. He CC'd the world. My name sat alone on the to line, like a spotlight without a stage. But things were about to get worse. 2 interns were reassigned to event experience, which is corporate for carrying boxes. One of them, Jules, had been my only coffee buddy. She whispered, I asked the wrong question in a stand-up, and I watched HR escort her to a different floor, where people go when they still work here but no longer belong. Janice stopped replying to my notes entirely. Kara began asking for my drafts one day earlier, so she could polish, and my bullet points started appearing in decks with her initials on the cover. I tried not to care. I told myself this was the cost of access. Except access didn't feel like a door opening. It felt like a trap resetting. At night, the tower sounded different. Elevators dinged in empty hallways. The HVAC sighed like a sleeper who'd seen too much. Twice, leaving late, I saw Sloane step out of an elevator from a floor my badge couldn't touch. Once, she carried nothing but that unbothered posture. The second time, she carried a slim hard case, the kind musicians use and lawyers prefer. Luis paused his cart as she passed. He didn't look up because he understood gravity. Busy night? I asked, pretending to fix my shoe. Always as before the gala, he said. Lots of deliveries. What kinds? The kind that leave no boxes, he said, rolling away. I went home with my head buzzing and my laptop heavier than it should have been. I dreamed in cells and columns. In the morning, my badge blinked red once before it turned green. A glitch, if you believe in coincidences. I stopped sending questions. I started building a private archive. Every time I reconciled a line item, I exported a copy to a folder on my desktop, I named innocently, notes_internship, and inside that, a second folder with a name that wouldn't invite a second glance, photos_for_decks. In there, I kept the versions that told the truth before the truth learned to adapt. The gala loomed. Brent's emails multiplied. Friendly reminders became deadlines. Sloane's calendar was filled with 30-minute blocks called alignment, which I learned was code for make it say what I want. The day before the event, Brent asked me to swap the Northbridge lines into general advisory event. It would simplify the narrative. I didn't reply. I made a copy first. That evening, Priya's second sentence arrived, check vendor 6802, month end. I filtered again. There it was, a series of small transfers routed through different projects, each landing in a Northbridge account ending in 7142. The dates hugged our press releases like shadows. I followed the filing crumbs to a permissions wall labeled Archive 9. I couldn't open it, but I could see the file names. Orchid_ledger_q2.xlsx, gala_dspnc_recon_solve.xlsx. Northbridge_workplan_final_v5. Solved. Final. Words that only appear when someone is trying to end a conversation. I walked to the window. The river moved obediently, as if even the water here reported to someone. What happened next left everyone shocked. The gala night arrived in gold and flashbulbs. Carrington Tower dressed itself in flowers and good intentions. Sloane descended the staircase like the event had been built for her entrance alone. The speeches praised impact, reach, and a future we can all believe in. My job was to sit at a back table and make the numbers match the story in real time. Halfway through the program, a notification lit my screen. File updated. Gala_DSPNC_recon_solved.xlsx. My local copy did not change. The shared drive did. A line for emergency housing grants shrank by exactly the amount that Northbridge Partners advisory grew. The totals still balanced. The story still sang. I looked up. Across the room, Sloane was laughing with a senator. Kara was nodding at a donor like she'd invented generosity. Brent was at the bar, counting smiles. Janice was practicing hers. I clicked open a second file in Archive 9, a spreadsheet called Orchid Ledger Q2. The first sheet was blank, secured. The second was not. It held a simple 3-column table: date, amount, note. The note field had only one repeating word. Orchid. And next to the largest transfer of the quarter, a parenthetical I wasn't supposed to see, SC, personal. The letters didn't need a key. They pressed into my chest with the force of something finally making sense. And yet, even that wasn't the thing that stopped my hands cold. Because buried 6 rows down, there was a payment reference that matched a sealed settlement I'd seen when I was researching Carrington's history for a college paper, a settlement the press never got the details on, a settlement that began the same summer a private driver was quietly dismissed and a local family stopped returning calls. The cursor blinked. The room applauded. Sloane raised a glass. My world narrowed to a single, traitorous realization: this wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was choreography. I saved my copies. I closed the files. I looked back at the stage. And then the lights flickered. Only for a breath. Long enough for me to see Sloane glance toward the balcony, toward the one person in this room who would know exactly what I had just opened. Long enough for me to understand that I was not the only one watching. But things were about to get worse. The gala ended in a blur of applause, handshakes, and polished smiles. Donors clapped, champagne spilled like water, and speeches bled together until all that was left was the echo of promises no one intended to keep. But my head wasn't in the applause. It was still in that file. That one word. Orchid. And those 2 letters that clung to the transfer like a fingerprint, SC. I left the ballroom late, almost last, my badge dangling like a weight against my chest. The city outside was still alive, horns echoing, streetlights staining the sidewalks gold. But inside Carrington Tower, silence had returned. Too much silence. Even the janitorial carts moved differently, like they were careful not to disturb something fragile. When I reached my floor, I noticed it instantly: my desk drawer was slightly open. I never left it that way. Inside, the notepad I used for scribbled math problems, the one no one else would bother with, had been flipped open to a blank page. Someone had touched my things. I tried to calm myself. Maybe Janice. Maybe Kara. Maybe Brent is looking for an excuse to scold me again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't random. This was a message. The next morning, I confirmed it. Brent appeared at my desk with his too bright smile, tapping on the top of my monitor like he owned it. "Busy girl," he said. "Let's make sure you don't burn yourself out. Sloane needs the new donor reconciliations on her desk by the end of the day." Hand delivered. It wasn't unusual for him to assign me extra work, but the way his eyes lingered made me uneasy. Almost like he was daring me to say no, testing how much I'd bend before breaking. That afternoon, while cross-checking vendor files, Kara swooped in like a hawk. "Sweetheart," she said, "you used the wrong coding again. I'll fix it this time, but you really need to be more careful." Except I hadn't used the wrong coding. I'd followed the exact template she gave me. Still, she took the file and walked away, heels clicking, already claiming the credit for the work I had done. It was my first taste of real humiliation. A deliberate attempt to paint me as incompetent. And when I tried to defend myself, Janice only patted my hand, whispering, "Don't worry about it, Maya. That's how things go here. Just keep your head down." But keeping my head down was getting harder. Because once you see cracks in a system, you can't unsee them. Every smiling face at Carrington Tower looked more like a mask. Every polished number in a spreadsheet looked more like a lie. And every step I took toward Sloane's office felt like walking into a storm. One evening, Priya called me into an empty conference room. She didn't sit. She just stood by the window, staring at the skyline as though searching for words. "You need to be careful," she said quietly. "Careful about what?" I asked. "About being noticed." Her eyes finally turned to mine, sharp and knowing. "The files you're touching, they don't just move money. They move people. And people don't like being moved without their permission." Before I could ask what she meant, the door opened. Sloane herself walked in, her presence so sudden, so overwhelming, it felt like the air left the room. She looked at Priya, then at me. And she smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Intern," she said smoothly. "Walk with me." I followed her down the hall, my heart pounding, my footsteps echoing against the glass walls like confessions. We stopped outside her office. She leaned in, close enough that her perfume wrapped around me like silk and steel at the same time. "I admire ambition," she whispered. "But you should learn the difference between ambition and recklessness. One gets rewarded here. The other gets erased." Then she walked away, leaving me rooted to the floor, her words sinking into me like ice. That night, I stayed late, telling myself I was catching up on work. But in reality, I was chasing shadows. I opened more files, saved more copies, and built my secret archive. Every line item, every vendor, every suspicious transfer, I documented them all. Because if Sloane was warning me, then I had proof she wanted hidden. And that's when it happened. At exactly 11:07 p.m., my screen flickered. Just once. A tiny blink, like the system exhaling. And then a new file appeared in my shared folder, one I hadn't created. Its name was simple. Stop. I froze. My hands hovered above the keyboard. I clicked it open. Inside, there was only one line of text. "You're not the only one watching. Be careful, Maya." The room felt smaller. My chest tightened. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out of the shadows. But I was alone. At least, I thought I was. The next morning, Brent announced in the staff meeting that certain interns had been overstepping boundaries, and effective immediately, all interns would now be monitored more closely. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I wanted to sink into the floor. Instead, I lifted my chin. Because humiliation only works if you let them see the cracks. But things were about to get worse. I used to think being an intern meant invisibility. That no one saw me, no one cared, and no one noticed what I did. But the moment that file appeared on my screen, the one that simply said stop, I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. Someone was watching me, and not just Sloane. Someone else in that tower was tracking every keystroke, every folder I opened, every copy I made. For a while, I sat frozen at my desk, staring at that single line of text. Be careful, Maya. How did they know my name? How did they know exactly what I was doing? And why warn me instead of exposing me? I spent the next morning in a daze, replaying the moment over and over again. Every hallway glance felt heavier. Every meeting felt staged. Every laugh sounded like it had a second meaning. For the first time, I wasn't just afraid of Sloane. I was afraid of the walls themselves. And then it happened, the discovery that changed everything. It started with a calendar error. Brent accidentally forwarded me an invite meant for senior staff only. A boardroom meeting, flagged as confidential, with a subject line that simply read, Orchid Review. The word hit me like a spark. Orchid. The same word is buried in that ledger. The same word is tied to Sloane's initials. I should have deleted the invite, pretended I never saw it. But instead, I did something reckless. I showed up. The word hit me like a spark. Orchid. The same word is buried in that ledger. The same word is tied to Sloane's initials. I should have deleted the invite, pretended I never saw it. But instead, I did something reckless. I showed up. I waited until the glass doors swung shut behind the executives, then slipped quietly into the service corridor that ran parallel to the boardroom wall. The tower was a maze, but I had learned its arteries, the delivery shafts, the maintenance closets, the hidden vents that carried sound where it wasn't supposed to travel. I pressed my ear against the thin metal and listened. What I heard didn't just confirm my suspicions. It shattered any illusion that Carrington Global was what it pretended to be. Sloane's voice was steady, controlled, as if she were discussing quarterly profits. The Orchid accounts are stable, she said. Funds continue to be routed through Northbridge without delay. Settlements have been honored, and no press inquiries have connected the disbursements to us. As long as reporting matches the narrative, exposure is impossible. Exposure. Settlements. Routing. The words hit me like a hammer. This wasn't philanthropy. This was a cover-up. Orchid wasn't a project. It was a code name. A secret fund used to bury scandals, silence families, and protect reputations, her reputation. For months, I thought I was fighting numbers on a spreadsheet. But in that moment, I realized I was staring at the machinery of corruption itself. And then Sloane said something that turned fear into resolve. If anyone inside tries to dig, they won't last. We've handled that before. We'll handle it again. Her voice was casual, almost bored. As though people weren't people to her, just obstacles. Disposable. My stomach dropped. That warning file. The open drawer. The humiliation in front of the team. It wasn't paranoia. It was a strategy. They had seen me. And if I didn't act, they would erase me just as easily as they had erased others. I pulled away from the vent, my pulse racing, my hands trembling. For a second, I considered walking out of the building, never coming back, pretending none of this ever happened. But then I thought about the faces in those press releases. The families are waiting for schools that were never built. The children promised scholarships that never arrived. The people whose silence had been bought and buried under Orchid. And that's when something inside me shifted. I wasn't just an intern anymore. I wasn't just a victim of office politics or corporate cruelty. I was holding proof of something much bigger, and I had a choice, hide or fight. I chose to fight. I stopped being careful. I became deliberate. I saved every file, logged every change, tracked every shadow payment. I built an archive not just to protect myself, but to expose her. Because this wasn't about my resume anymore. It wasn't about surviving 12 weeks at Carrington Tower. It was about survival, yes. But more than that, it was war. The night of the confrontation didn't arrive with thunder. It came quietly, the way danger always does when it knows it doesn't need to announce itself. I'd spent days building my archive in silence, files, notes, cross-checks, every shred of evidence that proved the Orchid accounts weren't just sloppy accounting but a deliberate machine. Each click felt heavier than the last, like I was loading bullets into a chamber. And then, one evening, the chamber fired. It was Sloane herself who pulled the trigger. She called me into her office. Not through Brent. Not with a calendar invite. She appeared at my desk, her perfume arriving before her words, and said my name like it was already a question she'd answered. Maya. A word. Her office was colder than usual. The river glowed silver outside the glass walls, reflecting the city's lights like broken promises. She didn't sit at her desk. Instead, she leaned against it, arms folded, eyes fixed on me the way a cat studies a cornered mouse. "You've been busy," she said. My throat went dry. I wanted to deny it, to pretend I didn't know what she meant. But her tone left no room for games. She knew. "I don't know what you mean," I whispered. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "Don't insult me. You've been digging where you shouldn't. Pulling threads that were never yours to touch. Do you think I don't see everything that happens in this tower? Do you think your little archive is hidden from me?" My blood ran cold. She knew about the archive. She knew. For a moment, the room tilted. My secret weapon, the files I thought would protect me, had already been exposed. I felt the walls closing in, glass shimmering like it wanted to shatter. And then she leaned closer. Her voice dropped, smooth and deadly. "Let me make this simple. You have two choices. You can finish your internship quietly, walk away, and never breathe a word about what you've seen. Or," she paused, her eyes narrowing. "Or you can keep playing detective, and watch as everything you've worked for disappears. Your career, your reputation, maybe even your name. People vanish in this world, Maya. Numbers disappear. And so do people." Her words should have broken me. But instead, they lit something inside me. Rage. Defiance. The realization that she wasn't untouchable, she was terrified. Terrified enough to confront me herself. Terrified enough to threaten me. I straightened my shoulders, meeting her gaze for the first time without flinching. "You're right," I said softly. "I have been busy. And I've seen more than you think. The files. The transfers. Orchid. All of it. You can scare me, Sloane, but you can't erase the truth. Not anymore." Her mask slipped for just a second. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes before the arrogance returned. "You're a child," she spat. "An intern. No one will believe you." And that was when I delivered the twist. I pulled out my phone, laying it on her desk. The screen glowed with a single open folder, my archive, synced, duplicated, and already backed up to a cloud she couldn't touch. "They don't have to believe me," I said. "They just have to see this." Her face drained of color. For the first time, the storm was hers, not mine. The silence that followed was thick, electric. She stood frozen, every inch of her power slipping like sand through her fingers. And in that moment, I realized the truth. Sloane Carrington wasn't untouchable. She wasn't invincible. She was desperate. The confrontation wasn't an explosion. It was a mirror shattering. And as the pieces fell, I saw her for what she really was, not a goddess, not the weather, not the heir to an empire. Just a woman, clinging to a secret too dark to keep hidden forever. And as the words left my mouth, I understood something I hadn't before. The truth wasn't fire. It wasn't destruction. It was light. And once light enters a room, it can't be shut out. The fallout didn't happen instantly. Empires don't crumble in a single heartbeat, they crack, splinter, and collapse piece by piece. But the first fracture came the moment Sloane realized she no longer held the power. She tried, of course. The next morning, whispers spread that I had violated protocol, that IT had flagged irregular access. Brent paraded down the halls, dropping hints that I might be gone by the end of the week. Kara smiled too widely, as though she could already see my desk empty. But beneath all their theatrics, the ground was shifting. Because I wasn't alone anymore. Priya pulled me aside in the atrium, her calm voice steadier than my heartbeat. "Send it," she said simply. She didn't need to explain. She meant the archive. And so I did. Not to the press. Not yet. But to people who couldn't ignore it, regulators, auditors, allies who had been waiting for proof they couldn't be punished for lacking. When the first official inquiries arrived, Carrington Tower went silent in a way I'd never heard before. Phones rang without answers. Executives vanished into closed-door meetings. Files disappeared from the shared drive, but my copies remained untouched. The same walls that once hid their secrets now echoed with their panic. And Sloane? She tried to perform as always. She breezed into rooms with that same flawless smile, delivered speeches about commitment and transparency. But the charm was gone. People weren't laughing at her jokes anymore. They were studying her, calculating the risk of being in her shadow. The day she was forced to step down wasn't marked by fanfare or headlines. It was marked by the emptiness of her office, the glass walls cleared, the sculpture gone, the desk abandoned. One moment, she was the storm everyone feared. Next, she was nothing more than a vacancy sign. For me, everything changed. I wasn't just the intern by the printer anymore. I was the girl who had seen too much and refused to stay quiet. The girl who survived Carrington Tower and walked out with more than a line on her resume. I walked out with proof that even the most powerful could fall. And yet, the real surprise came after. It wasn't the inquiries. It wasn't the articles. It wasn't even the sight of Sloane Carrington's name quietly disappearing from the company's leadership page. It was the people who came to me, Theo, Priya, even Louise from facilities, one by one, quietly, almost shyly, thanking me. Telling me they'd noticed things too. That they'd wanted to speak, but fear had chained their throats. I realized then that exposing the truth wasn't just about tearing down Sloane. It was about freeing everyone she'd held in her grip. And as I stood outside Carrington Tower for the last time, the river glinting in the distance, I understood something I hadn't before. Survival is important. But sometimes, survival isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to choose to fight, not just for yourself, but for the people who can't. That summer started as an internship. It ended as a war. And in the end, the truth won. When I look back now, I realize it wasn't just about Sloane Carrington. It wasn't even about Carrington Tower. It was about the way fear can silence a room, and the way one person's decision to act can break that silence wide open. I was just an intern, young, inexperienced, expected to stay quiet and grateful. But sometimes, the people with the least power have the clearest view of the truth. And the truth is, dignity and courage aren't titles. They're choices. Choices you make in the moments when staying silent feels safer. It reminds us that resilience isn't about never being afraid. It's about moving forward even when fear is staring you in the face. That fighting for what's right doesn't always look like shouting in the streets. Sometimes it looks like opening a file, saving a copy, and refusing to look away. And maybe that's the real question this story leaves behind. Was this justice, or was it revenge? Did I expose Sloane because it was the right thing to do, or because deep down I wanted her to feel the weight of every cruel smile, every casual insult, every threat she'd ever thrown at people weaker than her? I don't have the answer. Maybe both can be true. Maybe justice and revenge sometimes walk the same path. What I do know is that power doesn't protect you from the truth. Not forever. And when the truth finally comes, it doesn't come quietly. It comes like light breaking through glass, sudden, unstoppable, and undeniable. If this story moved you, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of one simple thing. No matter how strong the storm seems, light always finds a way in. Because in the end, the truth wins. Always.